just want to make sure. I do my own editing and stuff like that. So if anything, we'll just pick out some nuggets if we do end up in a conversation outside of our script or whatever.
Yeah,
How was your
absolutely.
photo shoot yesterday?
So the photo shoot it was good. So
Mhm.
it's kind of like there's various aspects within the context of the shoot. So my girlfriend Alexandra is a movie makeup artist. She's an
Oh, so
excellent movie
she's the
makeup
one that's
artist.
doing. I
That's right.
love that. Oh
Yeah,
my
so we
God.
have a couple covers, her and I.
Oh, yes, please.
One of them is here.
Yeah.
See this? I don't know
Oh,
if you
I
can see
did
it.
see that.
Yeah. So
Yes.
that's her that did all the makeup for that. And if you go within the confines of
Mhm.
that magazine, there is amazing, pictures in there.
Oh, I can probably order that online. Hey.
Yeah, this is called Top Posters,
Mm-hmm.
and so now we're always looking. So there's a few win conditions. One of
Mm-hmm.
those was for her to do things that she hasn't done. So for me, I'm covered in tattooed and
Mm-hmm.
tattoos, and she wanted to essentially make them disappear and
Oh,
reframe everything. And so we did that. It took 3 hours to cover all my ink, and then we kind of
wow.
went down. Aside from my blackout sleeve on the
Yeah.
left,
Yeah.
that was left because
Mm-hmm.
even though there's no historical evidence to link tattoos with the Vikings,
Mm-hmm.
it's not very strong evidence, anyways.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's reasonable to assume if you look at other sort of uh, ancient sort of tribes and like
Yes.
especially in the warrior realm, I'd be
Yes.
hard pressed to think that there was nothing like that. I would really be. But
Yeah.
but anyways, we just a lot of it is mythology as well when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
Vikings, right? Because there's
Yeah.
what's real and what isn't. It gets all blended in, and so we that piece was accomplished like without a doubt. The other thing we're really after was to get another cover with that shoot,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know if the photos or if the session was structured well enough, if we captured as much of essentially if we optimized our
Mm-hmm.
output. So we're going to find out once the photographer is done editing the photos and kind
Mm-hmm.
of like going through them and giving it the flair that she wants as far as for the magazine submission,
Mm-hmm.
and then we go from there, right?
Oh, I love it. I
Mhm.
absolutely love creative projects like that.
Me too.
I had a girlfriend in Vancouver too that was a professional makeup artist, and I was her guinea pig. So
Yeah.
all of the experimenting while she was going through school, I got to sit in her chair, sometimes like 5, 6, 7 hours, and I was good though, because I would just sit there patiently and wow, at the end of it, I was so impressed.
That's
All
awesome.
right. So you want to jump into this?
Yeah, let's do
Okay,
this.
so I'm just going to do a
Mhm.
really short little introduction.
Mhm.
It's funny because I actually got some of that stuff off of the Beer and Bane show.
Okay.
Yeah. So all right. So I'm gonna get started.
Sounds good.
All right. Welcome to another episode of Trouble to Transformation. Today I have a special guest, Seb Lavoie. Did I say that right?
Yeah, perfectly.
Oh, excellent. Seb is a retired CWO, which is a Chief Warrant Officer. 23 years of combined service between the military and police. 16 years of that was in the tactical space on the ERT, which is actually the start of our conversation today. But we'll get into that in a bit. And now CEO of Raven Strategik, which is building operation capabilities of individuals, corporations, and teams.
Mhm.
And critical thinker and speaker, which I really like too. Yeah. Did you want to comment on any of that? Did I get that all correct?
Yeah, so I did spend 16 years in the
Mhm.
tactical space, but I was only 12 years on a full-time ERT. So
Mhm.
4 of those years were on another program, which is also a tactical program. But just
Mhm.
for those that know me,
Mhm.
I didn't spend 16 years on the team. I spent 12 years on the team, seven years as a team leader. And what was the latest piece again? The last.
The Raven Strategic?
Oh yeah, Raven
Yes.
Strategic. Yeah. Because
Mm.
yeah, so everything else is on point. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, with that, Seb, do you do individual consulting? Like for someone like myself, that I
Mhm.
want to take my practice into men's penitentiaries.
Yeah.
So, I'm in the middle of building workshops and whatnot. And is that something that I would be able to consult with you about?
Yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, with somebody like you, I'd be looking more at a collaborative approach than I
Mm.
would, necessarily from a business standpoint. But yeah,
Mhm.
those are all things that I can do. There is nothing it really in the realm of human performance that I don't dabble in at a sort of elevated level. This has been, the sort of the it's been the landscape I've navigated over the course of at least the last decade.
Mhm.
And I've, everything I do is to contribute to the pursuit of excellence, and who can I help achieve that based upon, the efforts that they're willing to put in. And then
Yeah.
we go
Well, we
from
need
there.
more of that now, don't we?
100%.
Yeah. So I'm just going to jump right into it. I'm
Yeah.
going to be as transparent as. Anyways, when I found you on social media, I had watched several episodes on the collective, which I'm actually going to include that link to this episode because if the viewers haven't seen the collective, oh man, the topics are on fire. I really enjoy watching all of them. However, when I was looking through your profile, I did see some photos of the tactics, and I am going to be totally honest here. My nervous system activated.
Yep.
Yeah, and I'm very self-aware. So when something like that happens, when I get a little bit dysregulated, I lean into it and I'm like, okay, what's going on here? And I do realize that we were once upon a time on very opposite sides of the blue line.
Mhm.
And I've had maybe if we actually dissected some of the timelines, you might have actually come through my doors at a, I know. We laugh about it now, but let me tell you,
Mhm.
back then I wasn't laughing.
Mhm.
That was probably one of the most intense situations I have ever experienced.
Mhm.
So, I mean, even if it wasn't you personally coming through my doors, it was definitely members of your team. Because I lived a life of organized crime for probably at least 10 years. I've had SWAT come through my doors a total of 4 times. And it was, yeah, like I said, it was one of the most intense situations I've ever been in. However, when you do come through the doors, you'd have to do something really, really stupid in order to get shot by somebody off the team, you know?
Mhm.
And I always said I would rather have SWAT come through my doors than the other guys
Mhm.
because the other guys, like the competition, are not going to be so nice.
Mhm.
They're there to hurt you.
Well, I mean, I don't know if that's the case or if it's
Mhm.
only a case of, oh, I see what you're saying. That competition. Yes,
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 that
yes, yes,
competition.
yes. And it is funny you should mention that
Mhm.
because, sorry, I thought you meant like regular officers.
No, no, no.
But yeah, you're absolutely correct. I mean,
Mhm.
I've had over the course of my 12 years on the team,
Mhm.
countless people say thank you so much. When the door was breached, they
Mhm.
thought that somebody was coming in to kill them,
Yeah.
essentially. And to see us was a relief, even though,
Mhm.
it was something was being, action against them. They still, the prospect of how precious life is in that moment, and
Mhm.
realizing in a split second that this is people that are not there to hurt you, whereas if the alternative scenario happens, that's it, there's nowhere
That's
to
it.
go, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I've had home invasion experiences as well, two which I avoided due to like maybe just luck. I don't know. However, really good situational awareness because I walked in on it, and yeah, and you're absolutely right. You know, when the SWAT is there and they're telling you to surrender, you surrender.
Mhm.
The one thing though that was really scary for me though was the dogs, the
Mhm.
canine units. I call them the land sharks
Mhm.
because they would get fairly close, and all I kept thinking is looking at the gear that they were wearing, you know, like the harnesses and stuff, and like please don't give up. Like the equipment failure is what I should say.
For sure.
So yeah, it was a very intense situation. Now, have you ever interviewed anybody, or has anybody ever interviewed you that was on the other side of those doors?
No, it hasn't really happened in like in a formal context,
Mm-hmm.
but definitely that happened a lot over the years in terms of general conversations, right? I've
Yeah.
had people even approach me in coffee shops, people that had changed their lives, and we had an encounter maybe 2 or 3 years ago, or whatever the case was,
Mm-hmm.
or even some parents of people that had an encounter with the team, but some of the actions of some of the team members, perhaps it helped the kid, like find some direction or a sense of direction, or help set them back on the right track, or whatever the case may be. And then the parents were very grateful, so the parents would come in. Like, I'm not gonna, I wasn't walking around and people coming to me all the time telling me how great the team was, but it's like these individual little stories that are coming out from time to time that gave meaning to the work that we did, even though there was additional meanings coming from, just taking care of our fellow officers, taking care of the organization, taking care of the team, taking care of the public. All of those things sort of added up. But the reality is nothing does it quite like this was life-changing and I'm a much better person now, or I've completely changed my ways and I'm now on a productive path.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's very much like my story. You know what I mean? So I definitely want to thank you for your service, because when people realize what is actually going on in that world, like that criminal organized crime world, like, how do we stop it? Like, they're getting kids at a very young age. And then I've always asked myself, like, how did it all start for me? Like, where did things go wrong? You look at the human development, the behavior makes sense. Like, for your experience as a young boy, you were driving by a takedown in Quebec, I do believe, in when it was like the Rock Machine and the Hells Angels. And you were asking your mom, like, who are those guys? And I really love that story, because I do believe your mom said, those guys are not afraid. Those are the guys that go in to go get those bad guys.
Yeah, I think it's, it's really important to kind of set the stage or provide a bit of context on that, in terms of that biker war in Quebec, with one of the deadliest chapters in Hells Angels history. It was a rocket launcher, automatic weapons, vehicle-borne IED and explosive devices on residences, and killing of entire families, killing of, cops roadside just for being pulled over, people getting in road rage incidents with bikers, and bikers would gun them down on the spot because they flipped them the bird. This was the context in Quebec when this happened. And so fear was real, and fear within the law enforcement community was at an all-time high, and it should have been, because there was no boundaries whatsoever. As we found out when Mom Boucher, the leader of the Nomad chapter, ended up having 3 or 2 prison guard gunned down, dead, right? Like, and that was the sort of the beginning of the end for him and the organization to a certain extent. And I'm not talking about the Hells Angels as a whole, but I mean, in the context of the Quebec landscape. But we were talking about very, very serious stuff that was happening there. And so Mom was very aware that there was limitation put on law enforcement on sheer account that if you wanted to live or see your family live, you better sort of stay back and let them operate in all impunity. But when Wolverine was created, which was a very aggressive unit dedicated to go after the bikers, they specifically ask that the members of that unit be good to go, unattached, and I don't mean not necessarily in a relationship, but just like mentally and emotionally, that they were in a place where nothing could be leveraged against them, and they were just hard workers wanting to go in, wanting to make a difference. So the guys I saw were the tactical arm of Wolverine.
Wow. And then when you told your mom that day that you wanted to be one of those guys, and she said to you, oh, well, then you better get to work. But I mean, was your mom kind of afraid though? Like, was there a bit of fear for her knowing that her son now is going to take this path?
Yeah, I'm sure there was. I mean, Mom wasn't, necessarily voicing fear necessarily all the time, but I think she was very methodical in her approach as far as like how she was processing information. And one of the things that she said to me that made me believe that there was an inherent fear there, but that she understood that the need of the collective superseded her needs, so to speak. And one thing that she has said to me that kind of stayed with me was when I first spoke about joining the military, and she said to me, why is it okay for somebody else's son to go and not mine? Like, what am I special? Right. No. So, so I think she understood more about the concept of sacrifice than the byproduct, or the byproduct of it, which is which sort of lane are you going to take to make a sacrifice on account of the collective. Whereas mom was less worried about the mechanism by which I was going to do that, but the underlying principle that sacrifices has a cost, and that not the same people should be paying it all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, let's kind of get into the mind of a criminal. Like, what's the breeding ground for a criminal? What happens? Because, I mean, you look at, say, 3 different people, similar experiences, but yet 3 different outcomes, like just as an analogy, I guess, like the 2 boys that grow up in an alcoholic family. You'll get one son that grows up to be an alcoholic, and then the other one that never touch a drop in his life. So what do you think it is? Like, what happens to these kids? What programs them into wanting to be a criminal?
That sounds like a question for Jordan Peterson.
Yeah,
in my experience, I mean, we know that humans are extremely complex creatures, and a very small variable may change something, drastically, but also even a little bit of exposure to something different. So say you're one of the older kids, you've received a little bit more attention from the parents. And so is that possible that the second one now that, if there's a little bit of competition at home, I want to be different from this other guy because we don't get along. I mean, there's a million different things. And then you have life in this, life impacting people's reality, so what somebody experience in a certain way and their ability to process it and to turn it into something positive is very individualized, and it's incumbent upon a plethora of factors, a psychological and neuroscientific factors. I mean, it's at the end of the day, but it's really interesting that you mentioned that, because I have 2 very good friends that in South Africa witnessed their parents being murdered, essentially macheted to death. And she was 9 at the time, the brother was 7. She was holding his eyes closed under the bed while basically their parents were being murdered in front of them. Both of them are UN lawyers. Both of them have helped countless people and really sort of refocused and rechanneled all of that towards helping the collective and being sort of that humanitarian aid and focusing on human rights endeavors and those types of things. Whereas some people, got bullied in high school and turned into murderers. Yes. And so I don't know. It's hard to establish unless we have the roadmap of somebody's life so that we can kind of look around. But there is some things that are constant in people that generally will turn the wrong way. Generally, victim mentality is at the top of that list. Yeah. Right? Yes. When you have victim mentality, you're now looking to retaliate in one way or another, or you give yourself permission to be the way you are on account of what happens to you. And you can see that creeping in very quickly. I'll give you a very good example that people might be able to relate to. Which is not nefarious by any mean, but it just goes to show how this kind of can work its way in. So you can have an employee that has an incredible amount of integrity, personal integrity, that can be trusted by their employer, all of this good stuff. But put them in the circumstances where they feel like they're being taken advantage of, and watch them start encroaching on the freedom that they have within the context of the organization. So that might be, I have access to batteries for our various electronics, but I'm going to bring batteries home to put them in my smoke detectors, because these guys they're not paying us for this, or they're not paying us for that, and whatever. So now, and this is it may seem like an innocuous sort of analogy, but it's not. It's that's how it works. If you start encroaching on your own principles on account of the things that are happening to you, where is the line? Next thing you know, you're taking a rental car to go, take the kids to soccer, or a work car to do that, even though it's against the rules. Yes. You're doing, and the more egregious you perceive the things that are happening to you, the more justification you get to do things in retaliation,
Yeah.
right? Or justify the things that you are doing just so you feel you're capable of looking at yourself in the mirror.
Yeah.
Well, that's no different with criminals. A lot of them, if you look, my friends that are UN lawyers, this was an opportunity for us to establish our why, to really focus on what we wanted to do, to grow out of this and do all those things. Whereas generally the speech you hear from people that are going the other way is always about this happened to me and this happened to me.
Yes.
And this happened to me. So for me, I believe, and I've been out yelling off the rooftop about victim mentality recently because we're at a time in time and space in human history, we're at a crossroads, and that victim mentality is proliferated at the speed of light.
I agree.
And if it doesn't stop, we're going to have some very serious problems coming down the line. And so I've been very vocal about this, but I do believe that plays a massive role.
Oh, I absolutely love that you said that. Accountability is everything, and like going back into these like core values and beliefs, when it comes to human development and we have a young child who's being taught like, F the government and I hate paying taxes and, the governments are criminals and but not really seeing what they actually can do for us behind the scenes, like taking care of like healthcare and, and all these other things and living in a country that's got clean water and paved roads or whatever. Right. But I mean, again, then you've got this kid that has this adopted set of values and beliefs that now he goes out into the world and makes them his own. And they might not necessarily be the truth, right? Because he's also created this identity around it. And I can even speak on my own experience. Like when I started getting into crime, I was angry at the government. I had worked my whole life. My first job was at 11 years old, and then here I am at like early 20s. And things started to crash down around me. Right. So then I became that victim mentality, that angry person that, oh, okay, well, then I'm just going to go sit here in a grow up, and make a lot of money and F the world. Right. And then it just spiraled from there. However, getting back on track, I had to take accountability for everything that I've done in my life, including getting arrested, including going to jail. I can't be mad at the police. They were doing their job, So,
yeah, it's a very interesting, and what's interesting and also frustrating to a point is that, for example, I never was a big fan of us getting involved in grow-ups. For example, we did it because oftentimes the grow-ups were booby-trapped. There was a lot of issues with grow-ups that caused a significant risk of harm. But as far as I was concerned, this was no worse than alcohol, right? Like, so I always had a sort of an inner struggle with that. And the way that I was able to navigate that is that how can we make this safe without, going overboard? Like, how can we make this safe and be professionals about it, but also ensure this and realize in the back of our minds that the people within the confines of that grow up or within the operation are just these people that are tending to this, right? Like organized crime is behind this, but nobody is at the scene, for example. Yeah. And so for me, there was an inner struggle there because I didn't actually believe in that. So now fast forward to a couple decades later, marijuana is legal in Canada. Yeah. So there's a bunch of people that were arrested over the decades. And some of them have had serious consequences as a result of that, whether it's the loss of a family member, the loss of employment, of credibility, or whatever the case may be. It has a cost. And so that can be very frustrating because the values of today are not necessarily the values of tomorrow. And there was a time where the RCMP was called upon, removing children from houses and sending them to boarding schools, right? And at the time, that was believed to be righteous. And guess what? It wasn't just the RCMP doing the thing. It was the elected officials. Yes. It was the clergy, and it was the people of Canadians supporting the people that were into power. So, and now transpose this to, 100 years later, and that's completely unacceptable.
Yeah.
And so how do we navigate these fluctuations? And that's kind of what can be very frustrating, and it can be very difficult. So at the end of the day, I think that having that moderated approach where stop seeing everything in black and white and start seeing shades of gray. And yes, you can have a black and white rule of law, but where is the discretion? Where is the discretion? How do we apply this? How do we effectively enforce the laws in a reasonable manner based upon the circumstance that we have? And also, how do we question when we're being asked to do something that we perceive as perhaps being, not in line with our core values, or simply something that we know has the potential to backfire down the line?
Yeah. And in my situation, like during that time, there was zero tolerance. And I remember being in court that day, and the judge looked at me and he pointed right at me and he said, "Young lady, I am going to set an example out of you." And he did. And, however, that it didn't stop there for me. It didn't stop there for me at all. It actually put me on the radar now for higher levels of organized crime, because I was able to do really hard things. I was stoic in a sense. A lot of people, when it comes to a female, they're worried about that. Oh, my boyfriend made me do it. And that wasn't the case. And I wasn't going to be ratting anybody out. So that was the beginning for me. That was the beginning. But I do have to say, though, over the years of being arrested and being interrogated as well by several undercover officers, I can't say enough how good they were to me. There was a few of them that actually tried to teach me about the nervous system, about why I was putting myself in these situations, and being addicted to like the adrenaline, that hormonal dump, and, and just having that hyper vigilant, always out there looking for danger, because that's what felt familiar in my body. I know it sounds really bizarre for some people to understand that, but when you go out into the world and attract danger, it's because it feels familiar.
Well, attracting danger gives you a sense of control over the things that can hurt you.
Yes.
Right. It's almost like saying, you know what? Don't worry about making my life miserable today. I'll take care of that myself. Thank you. And that's exactly what happens. It's if you walk around and your perception of events is that you're at the mercy of anything that wants to hurt you, might as well cause the hurt first. It gives you that sense of control, but it is very deceitful, because it doesn't stop adversity from hitting you anyways.
That's right.
It just gives you the impression that it does. It gives you the impression of having a little bit more control over what comes at you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, have you ever heard of the recapitulation styles?
I'm sure I have, but go ahead.
Yeah, it'd be something Jordan Peterson would say.
Yeah.
But anyways, so in therapy, because that's what I'm doing right now. I'm actually in school to become a registered therapist. I'm a counselor now, but I want to further my education. But however, anyways, the recapitulation styles is exactly what you just said right now. For instance, if you've got that young kid whose father literally throws him off the end of the dock to say, "I'm going to teach you how to swim." And meanwhile, that poor kid has never swam before in his life, but he's going to have to swim for his life now. So now that particular person can grow up with a recapitulation style that's called creative recapitulation. So now that's exactly what he does. He can get into stunts and things that are high risk because now he's in control.
Yeah.
And we see that a lot with strippers, dancers, and also sex workers, because a lot of these women have been sexually traumatized. So now they get into an industry where they can use their sexuality as power. I'm in control now. I will be seductive and manipulative and take your money. You know what I mean? So it's exactly what you said.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes beyond that as well. I was contemplating while you were talking there, and I was obviously listening, but also contemplating something called. There's kind of two different principles. So let's talk about the first one. So suicidal ideology, for example.
Okay.
Like a lot of people automatically think that somebody that has suicidal ideology want to kill themselves, want to harm themselves and leave, or stop the pain. Not necessarily, sometimes the killing is a byproduct of wanting the pain to stop.
Right.
The reality is there's a lot of people walking around out there. We're survival machines. And there's a lot of people going around out there having suicidal ideation because their brain is trying to keep them away from doing that. And so it keeps on bringing it up so that they stay away from it. It's kind of like the call of the void. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but if you're somebody that has a fear of height and you're moving near an edge, people will say that they can hear the sort of the void calling them to jump, like something that compels them to jump. And what happens automatically is when that happens, they get fearful and they step away from the edge. So that was a reverse psychological way of the body to get the person to get to safety. Well, there is an application of that in suicidal ideation, which people never, ever talk about.
Wow, that's really interesting. And I know exactly what you're talking about, that voice in the void. Yeah, it's actually kind of scary because it doesn't feel like it's your own voice in a way, but yet it is. It's your higher self, and it can kind of makes me think of people that go into psychosis, or have psychotic breaks. It's like, is that kind of like that in that void where there's that moment of like, it's not really your own voice anymore. You kind of lose control a little bit.
Yeah, I think, it could be a part of that for sure. But when it comes to the call to the void itself, I mean, we know what the end result is, which is you stepped away from the edge because you were fearful that you might do something stupid. But I put that idea in your mind specifically so that you step away from the edge. Whereas somebody that has no fear whatsoever will be right on the edge, walking backwards, walking sideways, taking selfies, doing all this stuff. And really the risk is the same. That person may fall and, to their demise, but there is no real survival mechanisms that's kicking in there for them for whatever reason,
Right.
And so, it's something that's so often overlooked or oversimplified is suicidal ideation.
Yeah. Or even homicidal ideation too.
Sure. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. And that's actually going to take us into the next subject that I wanted to touch on was risk tolerance awareness. Like, why is it that some people can jump out of a plane, in free fall, but yet won't invest $5,000 in the stock market. But the guy that invests $5,000 in the stock market will not jump out of a plane, and the difference and because when I worked in the oil field, because I was a safety in the oil field, like in the field, not the corporate. And that was my thing. I was a safety. So I'm like, why? What is it about this guy that will take so many risks? Like, are they calculated? Is he really just has a skill set? Because I always said my two biggest offenders was the new young worker that didn't know the hazards yet. And then my veterans that knew their job so well that they actually just didn't see the hazards anymore. And those guys were the ones I worried about the most. The guy in the middle, that was right in the middle, he was still taking his paperwork and doing the checklist and, going over things, right? So I just want to hear your take on that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And tracking history on this is very compelling. A lot of the parachuting accident, paragliding accident, like climbing accident, like just name it. The vast majority of the catastrophic accidents are experienced personnel. And when certain processes that are thought processes become autonomous and you are just now going through the motions, it leaves room for mistakes to happen, right? Like I'll give you an example of this. I had an old commander on the team who used to be on CERT, and CERT was the predecessor of JTF2. And, CERT was an elite unit, and he was an elite operator that had no fear of heights really. And he was just a rope person that used to do all the rappelling and teach it to others and do all this good stuff. And one day he was on a phone call with Ottawa for a transfer, and he's walking on the edge and all this good stuff. And he's preparing to go over the edge, and he's not even tied in. Somebody caught him and said, "You don't have a rope," which is a minimal requirement. But again, another exemplification of that. And I think, complacency is what happens. And so for me, what I do to sort of circumvent this is everything. There is no emotion attached to my ability to do certain things. There's either a process or there isn't one.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if there's a process, then I'm following a process. If there isn't one, then, and so, but I don't want it to be a blind process. I don't want it to be a process that I do so often and that it becomes autonomous and there is no thought process and there's no engagement or brain engagement in that operation. I want to avoid that at all costs, because you know that one day if you treat your gun like a hammer, one day you're going to make a mistake that the hammer will let you get away with, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. So I think it's but then to go back to sort of the core of your question, which was what makes somebody, well, the answer is it depends, right? Ultimately it comes with, I feel like there's people that will have no problem endangering their physical self because somehow it gives them a sense of control over what they're doing, and adopting the risk prematurely or preemptively almost gives them the feeling that if I do it willfully, then it doesn't happen necessarily. And this is a subconscious process. I'm not talking about
it is so subconscious.
Yeah, like I'm not talking about them sitting there having that conversation with themselves. Yeah. But then financial risk can create a lot of stress for some people, and some people more than physical stress stress, risk of harm. You know.
Yeah. And I think it goes back again to like the human development, right? Because, you know, in timelines when we got 0 to 6, 7 to 15 or whatever, and then into adolescent and stuff, you know, we are like this subconscious programming. We're just like little sponges that are adopting all these values and core beliefs from our earliest caregivers. So, I mean, and it goes back to like, okay, you know, that the child that was thrown off the end of the dock, you know, or the child who was like constantly being coddled. Don't do that. Don't do this. You're going to get hurt. Wear your mittens, do up your jacket, you know? So I think that there's consequences to all of that type of behavior, you know? And then once we get into our adolescent, like 18 to 25, now we're shaping our identities, you know, and like working in the oil field, like there was big crews out there, and there's some guys that honestly, they go in guns blazing, just absolutely no thought process at all. And those are the guys that are wrecking equipment and getting in trouble or whatever, you know. And it's just interesting to see both those types of personalities in the field, because I do remember you mentioned that as well, that you wouldn't want somebody on your team that was just guns blazing, all like adrenaline junkie, you know, no thought process at all. It's interesting to see that even in law enforcement that you deal with that all the time.
As long as you're dealing with humans, you're dealing with humanity things, right?
Yeah.
But I think what's important to recognize is that humans have a tendency to operate in extremes. And our safest bet generally is in the moderate approach to negotiating life. And so if you see everything in black and white, you are likely to adopt a lifestyle that does that. You know, and you're going to find that it's going to take away your ability to be adaptable and flexible and to see things in a different way and to adopt other lenses and to look at the world from different angles. And you're going to be self-limited until you make a conscious decision to realize that you're operating in extremes, that you need to bring yourself back to where it's going to be more beneficial for you in order. That's the whole premise of critical analysis. You know, critical analysis from an academic standpoint is exactly that. You're looking at one side, you're looking at the other side, you're looking at evidence being produced, you're looking at the sort of the interconnectedness of those subsystems, and you're forming an opinion an informed opinion on account of, you know, the amalgamation of it all and having the ability to create your own argument. That is what life is all about. Life is one giant critical analysis, and it's also a one giant risk assessment.
Yes.
So critical analysis and risk assessment are you know, complementary. They're not separated. They're not separated entities. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. They should work together hand in hand. And so, absolutely, that, you know, one giant critical analysis is what we're all embarking on.
But let's also kind of talk about the physiology that comes with that too, right? Like the nervous system. I think that we're one gigantic nervous system too. And people do not like all my clients that I have to date have never learned about the nervous system. They have no idea about the thought, the feeling, and the outward behavior. And then they're stuck in these repetitive patterns about like, why does this always happen to me? Why does this always happen to me? And I keep telling them, because your nervous system is addicted to that fear, the anxiety, or whatever it is. So it's really interesting when you start to learn about the nervous system, and then you go out into the civilian world and watch people that have no regulation. They have zero emotional regulation. The emotional brain is driving the bus.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And it's driving it 100 kilometers over the speed limit in the wrong lane with a bunch of kids in it. Yeah, wow. You're absolutely correct. Yes. So I literally, I will feel emotional overinvestment and emotional dysregulation immediately. And it is completely overbearing for me. I just can't deal with people that are so emotional that there is no conversation to be had. There's no critical analysis going. There is no, like, I have no time for this unless those people are really important to me in one way or another. Right. Because emotional regulation affects everyone. Like, it's not just, and so evidently there's people in my life that at times might fall in that trap. And that might include myself. But one of the key pieces I think that you touched on is, I've had lots of people say to me, I've been to the same therapist for 6 years and nothing happened. Your problem is neuroscientific, not psychological.
Bingo. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And so now not seeing this as a holistic approach to problem solving something you are dealing with because you're doing it unilaterally or one dimensionally.
Yeah.
And so what I say to them all the time is, go back to your therapist and ask them about the neuroscience piece on that. Do they have somebody that they can talk to that can make sense of the correlation between the two and the interaction between the two? And that, I think, is where when I say the money is, I don't mean it like, figuratively speaking,
right?
Or I mean it figuratively.
Oh, I know what you mean. Yeah, absolutely.
This is where the money is. It's like, if you're addressing a set of circumstances in a very complex equation, which is somebody's life, and a lot of the intangibles and a lot of variables that you're not going to have any idea about, because a lot of it is subconscious, and they won't even disclose it because it's so subconscious to them that that's not something that they will think about sharing with you. But a lot of those concepts can be tied right into neuroscience.
Yes, I'm a big fan of neuroscience.
Precisely.
I watched Dr. Andrew Huberman a lot, and Joe Dispenza, and we are subconscious behaviors are patterns. It's patterns that we've done over and over and over again, which includes our thoughts. So even like in cognitive behavioral therapy, or even DBT, which is an offshoot of that, we always get people to do a thought inventory. And I know that some people think that's woo-woo or whatever, but I'm like, no, what were you just thinking about right now that caused that feeling of anxiety that now you're pacing the floors and being self-destructive? And repeat. And once they start taking inventory of those thoughts, they can actually start to pinpoint things that they've been, and then we interrupt that thought process, and we can make new neural pathways in the brain. And it could even be as something as simple as getting out of bed on the opposite side, brushing your teeth with the opposite hand, and saying affirmations, which is a different thought pattern. But a lot of people think it's woo-woo. And I'm like, no, this is a science. It really is a science.
I think that the reason why a lot of people think this is far-fetched or magic or whatever is because it's never articulated. It's just not.
Very true. Yeah.
Everybody consistently says, do hard things, do hard things, do hard things. Okay, that's cool. But why? How does it work?
Yeah.
What about hard things make me grow as a human being?
Yeah.
What are the mechanisms involved in this? What are some of the subsystems involved in this, whether psychological or neuroscientific?
Yeah.
And so I believe that having it, and this is a constant, with humanity is most people consistently think that everybody that doesn't necessarily know for certain about the field that they're about to have a conversation about, that they will not get any of it. So therefore, they're not sharing the information, or they jump on a bandwagon and continue to proliferate the stay hard and do hard things without ever questioning, why does that even work?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you know why it works, then you can extrapolate a bunch of things out of that. But then it helps you patternize it. And if you can patternize something, you can repeat it.
Yes.
The problem is something that makes non-repeatable behaviors is because you intrinsically do not understand it.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And then going back to like incarcerated men and women, but my work is going to be with more men. But, most of those men inside those walls, they've had a lot of childhood adversities and traumas, therefore now have developed, neural pathways in their brain that have developed patterns and personalities. Like they say, a feeling can create a mood, and then the mood can create the personality. Right. But now what they're finding is they're bringing somatic therapy and somatic therapy. TRS was a therapeutic reenactment therapeutic release. Yeah, that's what it is. And then so what they're trying to do is rewire their brains. Yeah. And so that they can understand that they are not these identities. They are not these patterns. Because some of my clients, they will even intentionally not pay their bills on time because they're so used to being on this roller coaster of flooded emotions and emotional dysregulation that it's not that they don't even have the money. Like they do have the money, but they're just purposely, intentionally putting themselves in these situations to create stress.
The evil is sometimes less daunting than the evil you don't know.
Yes.
And a lot of people don't necessarily want to see themselves live up to their potential because that scares them.
It does. The fear of success.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
And or the fear of failure, right? One of those two. So it's either the fear of success or the fear of failure in attempting something that's great and lofty.
Yeah.
What they don't realize is the cost of not doing it.
Yes. Yes, that is so true.
So you're conducting a risk assessment, but you're forgetting an entire piece. We could bring that to certain time, not so long ago with where risk assessment was used, but a lot of the problems that came as a result of the decisions that were made were never put inside the risk assessment to also look at that. So that's not a holistic approach to problem solving anything. If you take all of the risk on one side, but none of the consideration. And again, what are we talking about? Critical analysis.
Yes. Yeah.
We're talking about critical analysis. And so for anything, and if there's people out there that are wondering, I've met a lot of people in school that are dumb. Well, yeah, there's dumb people everywhere. But going to school and having following an academic route will teach you critical analysis, which is a very important skill set. Yeah. Whether or not you decide to use it for righteous purposes, or you are closed-minded and you have your own set of issues, it really doesn't matter. You could be in any walk of life. If you're an idiot, you'll still be an idiot.
Yeah.
But I think it's important for people to understand that is where the magic is. How do we critically and analyze? Now, when it comes to anxiety, it's such an interesting thing, because there's a lot of people that let anxiety define them.
Rules them.
Just very, very anxious. And so they prevent themselves from heading into exploration, which curbs anxiety, and take it head on. And instead they will remain in a perpetual cycle of anxiety, so that they're, the evil they know is there comforting them. Yeah. So that's a comfort of sort.
It is. You're absolutely right. Even though that sounds kind of morbid and twisted, it is a comfort of sort, because it's the nervous system. It's familiar to them.
100%.
Right. And one thing too, and this might be unpopular comment. However, I don't discredit neurodivergent. I do not discredit, ADHD or, OCD and whatnot. However, and there's TBIs, and I get that. Okay. But this is not what I'm talking about right now. What I'm talking about is I find a lot of people self-diagnose. They're like, oh, I've got ADHD because I can't concentrate. It's like, but have you actually made yourself sit there? Like Joe Dispenza will say, tell it to sit like a dog, sit. And you're going to sit and be with your thoughts. And yes, they're uncomfortable. However, I just feel like, and Jordan Peterson, again, he will say that take your kid, put him in front of his favorite gamer, and then put him in front of a math equation and watch the ADHD or ADD, right? Like he will fidget in his chair with the math equation, but yet when he's in his game, he is hyper focused. And what I think is happening is the dopamine, right? The math equation is not giving the instant gratification. Therefore, he's not going to sit through it because the gratification is way too far for him to even grasp what that might be like. Right.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack in what you just said. Like this short segment of you touched on so many super critical things. And one of the things that I would like to go back to, because I think within the context of everything you said, it's probably, in my opinion, the most actionable for people that are listening to this podcast. And that is, do not let people put you in boxes, but more so, do not put yourself in a box.
Yes.
Like what, because and we know, like, and I can guarantee you this, you will live up to your own expectations of yourself.
So true.
You will live up to that. So if it's constant, a constant, it's my ADHD. I have nothing to do with this. Yeah. Oh, really? There's a lot of people with ADHD that get to mitigate all of its sort of, in fact, I would say they mitigate all that's bad about ADHD and focus all that's and obtain all that's beneficial, because there's a lot of beneficial things with ADHD, like hyperfocus, for example, right? And so, but the time that you write and paint that box around yourself and say, oh, it's just my ADHD, or I just don't have an attention span. Attention is a choice. It's not an accident. It doesn't happen by accident.
It takes work. It takes work. It's hard work.
It takes a ton of work.
It does.
If you're not used to doing it, it takes more work.
Yes, absolutely. Right? Yeah. And I think like I've experienced too with clients where they're like, please just, I can't diagnose. That's not my skill set. However, when they become diagnosed, it's like this sense of relief that, now there's something wrong with me and I can just take this exit. And then there was this really amazing study. I think it was in Virginia. I wish I could remember the professor's name, but they put people in a room by themselves with a pain stimuli, a shock mechanism. And that was it. They took away their electronics. They had no like external distractions. They left them in this room by themselves for 15 minutes with just their thoughts. That was it. Did you know, like, I think it was like 85-90% of those people would rather give themselves a shock, a pain stimuli, than sit there by themselves in their thoughts? That blew my mind.
It's absolutely mind blowing, but it absolutely does not surprise me. And so on that premise, there isn't a single thing about you that will be optimized until you know exactly where your shortcomings are.
Yeah.
And not only you know where they are, but you understand how they impact your overall, behaviors within the context of your life. And so that is the piece where technical help is often needed, right? Like if you have somebody that really doesn't work in that area, doesn't have experience or exposure or whatever, that's the part where they say, I need a therapist to make sense of this here. So I'm going to give them what I know or what I think I know and let them help me paint the picture so that we can, once we have something concrete, we can go, okay, what is this rooted in? How do we turn that ship around? Right. Yeah. And this is where people get really emotional about, talk about the help you need. Not everybody needs help. Let's call a spade here. Yeah. Some people have the ability, such a deep ability for introspection, but also even to have an instinct that will tell them when something isn't right in the context of their own life, and they may not need somebody to help. But other people may not have that, or may not fully understand that, or may not fully trust that. And if that's the case, then they need technical help. And once they've established this in an engaged way, I don't like when people go to therapists as a check the box every week, and 6 years later they're still going to a therapist. Is like, hey man, you haven't figured out anything about yourself in the last 6 years. And I'm not suggesting that you've seen a therapist for 6 years, that you're doing something incorrectly. What I am saying is, it is the case for some people where they're always in the passenger seat, and they don't pay attention and they don't engage in the system so that they themselves learn to sort of navigate their own ebbs and flows. Because there's somebody there to help them. And so it's no different than, being in the passenger side of a car, going to a location, but you're not paying attention. I don't care if you've been there 10 times. You still won't know how to get there. So in order for you to really benefit and optimize your own performance, you're going to need, if you don't have the technical skills, seek the person that has the technical skills and learn from them about you. You're not going to become a therapist, but you're going to know you, right? And that's, so I think, a piece that's often missed. But nothing gets better until it's exposed.
Agreed. And you're absolutely right about that too. You can see a therapist once a week. However, if you're not putting in the work during that next appointment, and I know therapists that will only do up to 3 to 6 sessions, and that's it. They're like, nope, after 6 sessions, people tend to fall off. And they don't actually do the work, and they just don't have the time anymore to, they want to work with clients that are actually willing to do the work. Right. So it's tough. Right. So do we have time for maybe just one more topic?
Oh God, I'm good to go. You have
are
me.
you? Okay.
Yeah. No rush.
I wanted to, and I'm glad that we touched on that neurodivergent stuff, right? Because I'm in so much agreement with that. I'm like, damn, like, I think we really are, we're so capable of fixing ourselves in so many ways, right?
Well, you know what? Let me capitalize on this opportunity here to speak about something quickly that it's a hypothesis that I came up with this week while on a walk. So I was walking my dog one morning, and I started thinking about the concept of special operations and special operators. And we're talking about military context, or special forces for the uninitiated, right? Is referred to as special operation. And we know that these humans are operating at a level where the rest of us aren't. And it's that simple.
It is that simple.
We are looking at 0.001% of the population of the earth that it's trained and capable to do all of the things that they do, which include all of the realm of the human experience, but at a much more intense level, right? And so one of the arguments for the benefits of bringing these guys to teach or to do leadership courses or whatever the case may be is always their ability to manage the intensity of the situation and to control chaos. And I can stand behind that. I have no problem with that. But it is not where the real gold is. It's not. It starts way before that. It starts in selection. It starts in selection. And the reason why that is because you are now confronting a human with their own self and everything about themselves that they absolutely hate and despise or fear. And you have them negotiate self-defeating mechanisms by themselves until they come out on the other hand undefeated.
Right.
Yeah. So now what you have done is you have taught a human being internal power and to step into it. Right. So the real gold around special operation is how it teaches humans to to give them the tool to be the person that they need to be for themselves, and to defeat the self-defeating mechanisms that are coming into play. So that can be, oh, you don't really want to be here, or this is too hard, or you can't do it. So that includes the whole gambit, like imposter syndrome and the list,
everything,
on and on and on. And so that is why we need to try to replicate, because we are powerful beyond measures, and humans are walking around thinking that we're victims of everything.
So
we're
true.
not. You have so much power, but you need to tap into it. You need to step into it. You need to be a willful participant in this game called life.
Yeah, I just love that, Seb. And it's so true, right? Because even as a therapist, some of my clients, when they finally have that aha moment, and you actually can witness their life shift, and they realize that they've had that power the whole time. It's so gratifying for me to have somebody say, I finally get it. And I'm like, yeah, but self-awareness, because we have so many distractions, these things here, they're the worst, right? Because, I can't remember the author of Harry Potter series. Is it JC Rowling?
JK Rowling?
JK, yeah, sorry, I should know this. But anyways, so she was on a 4-hour train ride. Right. And if she would have been streaming Netflix, we would have never been introduced to, Harry Potter.
And she wouldn't have been introduced to 168 billion.
It's exactly. And I mean, that might not be quite like on topic there, but it's kind of a little bit, right? Where people don't really realize like their true potential is it's distracted. It's so distracted. We're checking out. We're not even self-aware anymore at all.
We're not engaged in the process of being the best version of ourselves, and how much power we have over up it. And when you say, oh, it's my ADHD, you just relinquish all powers. Exactly. You have signed your power over to somebody else. Yeah. And so it's important to understand that there are things in your life that will, what's the word I'm looking for? That will be contributing factors to some of the behaviors that you have. And that's okay to acknowledge that. That's important. You need to understand that. But it's what you do with that information that matters. You can't be you can't be like, oh, my ADHD kicked in, silly me. I'm just gonna walk off now and do it again in 10 minutes. Right. That doesn't work. Yeah. Like, are there things that I can be doing to optimize my own performance, operating within the context of having this as a contributing factor to some of the perhaps difficulties I'm having? Yeah. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to be a little bit transparent here too, like in the past, I had a really bad hair pulling habit. Yeah. And it was so subconscious that I didn't even realize that I was doing it until like you'd look around, I'd be covered, it was terrible. I had it since I was a kid. And before I even became a therapist, I actually did my own DBT without even knowing, I should say. And I wore an elastic band on my wrist. And every time I caught myself pulling on my hair, I would snap it and cause a pain stimuli. And I just kept doing that over and over and over again. And I think within about 2 weeks, it was gone. That habit was gone.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah. You know what I mean? So I'm, if I can do it, everybody can do it. Cause it was really bad. Like it was when I was a young kid, I pulled out chunks of it. Right. And due to obviously some childhood trauma, but whatever, we're not going to get into that. But again, changing those habits, those patterns, it starts with you.
For sure. And that's a symptomology. So, something that's, I'm sure as a therapist, you'll agree with is that you can't come to that realization and not deal with the problem. Like the actual problem is the childhood trauma. Right. Yeah. So now you're dealing with the symptomology. So you've stopped the symptoms, but you've stopped a symptom, not all of them.
So true.
Yeah. So again, exposing that piece, which is the childhood trauma piece, and the piece that hasn't been made with certain things within the context of your life needs to happen so that you may stop all symptomology of it. So true. Right? Or so mitigate at the very least.
Yeah, because there's like a lot of cross addictions too. You know what I mean? Like somebody who's an addict that's recovered now is like in the gym for, 3 times a day, just losing their mind in the gym. And I mean, yeah, okay, that's great. Like that's good. It's healthy. However, it can also go on the other end of the spectrum too, where they're just beating their body up and, retail therapy or food addictions. Like sometimes those traumas with those addictions and stuff can just meld into something different. So you're right. You got to deal with the trauma too.
Sure they can. And then the danger of that, again, is an excess of unidimensional approach to problem solving something. So I hear this a lot, I'm in the gym to burn off the crazy. And to a certain extent, it's a funny statement until you got your leg amputated. And now your gym performance is no longer what it was. And your ability to do it for the next 6 months is gravely interfered with. Now what?
Because
you have essentially define yourself as this now. And this is it's your unidimensional approach to who you are as a human being, and your entire sense of self-worth is tied into this endeavor that you no longer can do for the next 6 to 8 months.
Yeah.
So let's call it an experiment, and let's take your self-worth away for 8 months, see what happens.
Yeah.
Like you can't have that, right? And you cannot allow yourself to do that. You have to be multi-layered, and you have to be multi-dimensional so that you can recover from anything that life throws at you.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm not speaking for everybody, but for a lot of people, it's an avoidance tactic too. You know what I mean? Like that dopamine hits. It's like, because they haven't dealt with that childhood trauma or the adversities in life. So now they're just, distracted over here in the gym for, 12 hours a day or the retail therapy and whatnot, like you said. And then that identity becomes attached to that. And then when they cannot do that anymore, then they're going to spiral again. And as I'm on this journey to my own self-healing, because part of my program, as far as the counseling program that I'm in, part of it was experiential. So we had to try on all the modalities of healing. And now this has really encouraged me to actually want to go further into the therapy world, because I want to help people. But throughout my life, though, because of some of those events in my life, being of organized crime and whatnot, and I know this must happen in law enforcement as well, and military, but the moral wounding of what happens when you realize that you've dehumanized people, depersonalized them, you've denied actually the fact that you've been hurting people and intentionally harming your fellow man. I'm sure you probably see that in the military as well as law enforcement.
Oh, 100%. I mean, we are putting humans through human experiences that shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Is that simple? Yeah. I mean, when you look at it, we have made, when we have rendered capable modern military, say, with the ability to do the work unimpeded on the spot, which means no hesitancy in the natural propensity that humans have to not want to kill their fellow humans, for the survival of the species. But we have now empowered them to be capable and to be expected to do it easily. And so if you look at even some of the work of Dave Grossman, for example, on combat or on killing, speaking about shooting rates during World War II versus now, and how much more efficient our military shooters and our military personnel are and capable of, taking lives. But look at the rate of PTSD. Look at the rate of suicide. Look at the rate. So that tells a story. And I will tell you what story it tells. We're not meant to kill each other. We're not. And we're doing it, and we're engaging in it on account of political, ideology, religious ideology, and a variety of other things that we give ourselves permission to do some deadly sins. And I don't mean it in a religious sense.
No, I know what you mean. No.
But deadly sins against other human beings. And now we have to live with ourselves in having done something and crossed some lines that we are not, from a forensic biology standpoint, supposed to cross.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, it's so true. And I dealt with the shame of living that lifestyle. Like that was my biggest recovery, I think, from that lifestyle. It was not even just the addictions, but the shame that came afterwards. Like, I am such a bad person. I intentionally harmed my fellow man. But then there's areas of our, human existence, like inadvertently we're hurting our fellow man. Or are we actually inadvertently hurting our fellow man? Because, when we're buying the designer label handbag, and we're shopping for that 3-carat diamond, we have enough knowledge and information now to know that the people that are sourcing those products are not living humane conditions.
We have the ability as humans to create intense connection, and we have the ability to disconnect very easily, especially if there's no proximity, if there's no contact, if there's no humanity, like human context, where I can
Yeah.
see on the other side the person that's affected by this, and I can put it
Mhm.
into context. So what we are doing essentially in this context specifically is that
Mhm.
we are looking at a sanitized version of what we think is
Mm.
happening,
Ooh, I like that. Yeah.
and we are doing it through the lens of
Mhm.
people that live in Western countries where
Mhm.
it's not a third world country and everything. So
Yeah.
if I start thinking about kids' labor, and I always
Mhm.
do that with my clients, or I always do that with people. I'm like,
Mhm.
if I tell you to think about a boat, close your eyes and tell me what it looks like, and you will see that that boat will be described exactly as their life unfolded.
Mhm. Yeah.
Whatever exposure they had, whatever vision they've seen before, whatever the case is,
Mhm.
the boat itself, if you were to break it down in pieces and analyze it,
Mhm.
looks exactly like all the boats they've seen in their life.
Right.
The problem with that is that lens does not apply in Africa.
Yes. Right.
Like, you have no
Mhm.
idea what a boat looks like in Africa. So
No.
when you're looking at the world on an
Mhm.
African continent with some of the problems that are occurring, the
Mhm.
problem themselves are viewed through your lens.
Yes.
And
So true.
you can't fathom
Mhm.
what they don't have that you
Mhm.
have, or what kind of harm is coming to them, because that's never happened to you, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so I always warn and caution against that. Stop looking at the world in a sanitized
Yeah.
view through the lens, through
Mhm.
your glasses.
Mhm.
You're going to have to start going around figuring out what kind of other glasses you can put on so that you can look at the world,
Yeah, I,
and
I
as
like
soon
that
as you
sanitized. That I really like that analogy. That's really good. And then even going back to like the organized crime and the crime world, some of the people that I had met along the way that were like, say, for instance, I'll just use one guy that I knew personally. We'll call him Chico for the sake of this conversation. He was from Colombia. He was from South America, and he was orphaned by the time he was 11 years old. And the guerrilla warfare, like they try to capture children like that to turn them into soldiers and whatnot, which they did. And they tortured him. They tore all of his toenails off with pliers. But he eventually made it out of that country, and how he did it was with a backpack full of cocaine and a 3-week trek through the mountains. And now here he lands on Canadian soil eventually,
Mhm.
and is arrested eventually for drug dealing. So what do? We incarcerate them. We throw them away. We lock them behind these bars, never to be heard from again. And it's
Mhm.
like, look at the wounding that happens from that situation of just a young boy who didn't stand a chance.
Mhm. Oh man.
Compassion.
But and so, just being devil's advocate, right?
Of
Like, in
course.
this case, because I couldn't agree more with you from an individual
Mm-mm.
perspective and from a
Mm-hmm.
humanity perspective. Now,
Yeah.
the problem is, how do you operationalize that in a
Oh, I
society,
know.
right? and
Right.
and that is what the problem is.
Yes.
The problem isn't that we don't know how things could be done better, is
Mm-hmm.
how do you do them sustainably for the collective?
Yes, I so agree with
That's the
that.
problem.
And honestly, I don't even feel like that's devil's advocate right there.
Mhm.
Like, that is the truth. Like, what do we do as humans, as a society, as community to help this?
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Because he didn't deserve that. And
Yep.
Chico, he didn't even like drugs.
Mhm.
He never even touched drugs. He did not agree with drugs. However, that was his ticket to freedom.
Sure. And we're not even touching on, the other aspect of this with this. Okay, so let's put Chico on the side for a second. And I
Mhm.
understand, everything that you've sort of described makes sense.
Mhm.
Now let's look at the other side of this for that lady that lost her son to an overdose from some of the drugs that Chico
Yes.
brought over.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
he had a story as well. And
Yeah.
that story
So
was,
true.
so
Yeah.
that's where, you know,
I get
no,
it.
I mean
Yeah.
that's where the money is. That's
Mm,
where the
yeah.
money is. Like, that's where, how do we bridge that gap?
How do we?
How do we strike the right balance
Yeah.
between punishing behaviors, because punishment
Hmm.
is required,
Yep.
and rehabilitation, or or mitigating factors on account of
Hmm.
historical
Hmm.
tracking, or
Hmm.
all of those things? Like, how do we how do we do that in the context of a society where definitely there isn't enough time, money, resources, or any of this to make any of that happen. And so, and again, not to want to take a sort of a disengage approach to this, but we are looking at some very, very severe, potentially catastrophic consequences of not doing it. And we are looking at logistically and administratively and financially impossible to do.
Yeah.
And so essentially what I'm saying is we need thinkers, we need people, we need people that are dedicating their life to figuring out what is the best way to have a measure of balance between those two things.
Yeah, agreed.
But because we live in excess, we generally see all of one or all of the other. Like we need that gray zone. We need that moderated approach, to be able to strike that perfect balance. And that is where the challenge truly lies.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, the drug crisis, like it is truly an epidemic, as we know. The fentanyl crisis, we're losing 100,000 kids a year. And a lot of this stuff is coming right out of Snapchat, one pill kill, and stuff like that. And it's like, how do we stop this? How do we, what do we do? And that's exactly why I want to take my practice into the penitentiaries, because I want to start there, right? Because some of those people, there is actually some good people in there. They've just made one wrong choice, and it's like a controlled substance, but more like a controlling substance, because there's a supply and demand.
There sure is.
Yeah.
Let's call a spade a spade. I believe transnational drug trafficking is a $122 billion business.
Wow.
Right. So, okay. So if we look at this objectively, say in the context of transnational crime and counterterrorism, for example, right? So now we're looking at counterterrorism mechanism. The people that are looking in those very mechanisms, or how to best implement them for success, are also on the beneficiary part of a $122 billion drug trade. Right? Yeah. So we're not talking just conflict of interest here. We are talking massive conflict of interest. This is not a basic conflict of interest. This is a massive problem. So the question then becomes, what is the incentive to curb terrorism or transnational drug trafficking, to be more specific, if we stand to make $8 billion as a country?
Yeah, so true.
So now you're talking about morality, right? And values.
Yes.
Because if you're suggesting that the government should now spend twice the amount of money, so $16 billion, I'm throwing random numbers in there.
Of course, I know. Yeah.
But say we're going to use $16 billion to fight drug trafficking on a transnational or international stage. That means that we're doing it for the right reasons. You know what I mean? Like, we're doing it for the safety, we're doing it for this, we're doing it for that. And all of this, knowing full well that the money piece controls everything. Yeah. From a political standpoint, and I'm not suggesting that everybody can be bought, because it's not the case.
No, it's not the case, but follow the money. Follow the money.
100%. Always follow the money. And so now I'm having a massive problem with this. It's like we got all these hard workers and academics and people with operational experience that are racking their brain and working together and collaborating and trying to find solutions to the problem with transnational drug trafficking and do all this stuff. But at the end of the day, the decision makers are making $8 billion a year on that.
Wow. Yeah. Exactly.
How do we?
Yeah. Money talks. Yeah. Money. Well, and I feel the same way about the pharmaceutical companies.
It's exactly the same.
Exactly the
same. Not worse.
Well, yeah. I mean, I would almost say it's worse because it's legal. It's coming out of doctors' offices, and even in the construction industry, I'm seeing about a 37% of opioid addictions come from guys that actually had a full-time job. I think a lot of people don't realize who the addicts really are here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, just look at the rate of opiate prescription increase. I think over the last decade, we are prescribing opiates 30 times more than we did 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And with that, there's and it's inversely proportionate, because really there's no help. There's hardly any help for people to come off the opiates.
Yeah.
So what you're doing is you have a pain management system that can be useful to help with recovery, that turns into an addiction, that turns into there's nobody here to help you. So guess what? You're SOL, right? Like,
yes.
and some of those substances are addictive to a degree that most human could never comprehend.
We cannot comprehend it. It is so addictive. It controls you.
And you're seeing some people that have the ability to sort of, go cold turkey, do some things, but the pain they go through to do that, unless you are very experienced in taking that kind of pain, most people do not.
Yeah.
And so those are, and you're absolutely correct. I mean, if you're looking at it from a financial standpoint, the reason why we're prescribing 30 times the amount isn't so that because we have more pain to address.
Yes.
Is because it became the solution to absolutely everything. And just so happen, it creates addiction, which also is passive income.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I just recently watched that TV series, Painkiller. And I don't even think I could get through all of it. I was so angry. I was enraged by it, but I mean, more people need to see these types of things because, even like when you look into the criminal world, a lot of these young men and women that are getting into that lifestyle, they don't see the atrocities that are happening in the third world countries or intentionally harming man. They see like the Gucci handbags and the fast cars and and walking through lineups at the clubs and stuff, so they're glamorizing it. And that's why I get so angry. Like, I don't even listen to music anymore. I don't listen to any of that crap. I hate what it promotes, because they're programming our kids, our young adults, into thinking that that rapper or that pop star, like, oh, look at the life that they're living. Right. And it's like, oh my God, it's so detrimental to our youth.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, one of my biggest contention, and before I even say this, I will say this: I'm of mixed race. I'm half black, and one of my sort of biggest contention is the crying victim status. But also having all of those other things going on, such as how we proliferate hate through our lyrics, through our music.
Yes.
And don't get, well, this is the second time I dropped my coffee during a podcast this week.
Oh no, like,
yeah.
Oh yeah.
It's just everywhere.
It's, oh no. Oh yeah. Tend to it. Don't worry. Tend to it.
Okay. Give me 1 second.
Yeah,
here.
no, definitely.
Just for the record, this was coffee's fault. And what's interesting with this is I bought the biggest cup the Will has ever seen. There's like 6 cups in there just because I can have a really strong coffee. And so now it's half on my jeans, half on my keyboard, and half on the table.
Oh no. Well, we can wrap up here away.
No, we're good.
Okay.
Let's go back to what it is that I was
the music industry.
I was going on about. And so if you allow any subset of society to be perpetual victims, and you feed into it by saying, yeah, you're good, you can do whatever if I come after you now, because now what you're seeing in the States, for example, with all the lootings and everything, what I want to see and what I would like to see is leaders of the Black community address that piece. I don't care about what, historical this and that, whatever. I get it. I get it. I was on the wrong end of it, and I was on the wrong end of it. I would say twice as hard as most people, because I was discriminated against by blacks and white. I was, for whites, I was a black dude, and for black people, I was white.
Right.
So, I was stuck in no man's land, and whatever. It's water under the bridge. But the reality is, we need, as a society, you can't give any subset of society perpetual victim status and move away and look the other way while they're doing all kinds of stuff, and nobody's calling it out because they don't want to get canceled.
Oh, it's so true.
Yeah, because now we're running into some serious issues. And so for me, as a member of, say, or at least partially as a member of the Black community, I want to see more of those artists taking ownership and coming out and saying, look, like, all this stuff that we're spitting and proliferating and whatever, let me put some context around this here. This is entertainment, right? And this is not necessarily a healthy way to live your life. I don't even care if you don't want to stop making gangster rap, have those conversations, right? But we know it's never going to happen, because if you do that, you lose street creds. If you lose street creds, people are listening to you less.
Yeah,
right?
It's so true.
So there's a much to gain in not doing it, and that's what the problem is.
Yeah.
And so,
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that's a big sort of a big pet peeve of mine. It's like,
it is mine too.
How do we address societal issues when there's deeply anchored things that are consistently working against what the goal is?
Yeah, because I mean, music is a huge motivator. It can actually shape, a generation of kids, and I just recently watched Cardi B do a statement the other day about she's pro-Trump. And I mean, I'm not going to talk about politics, but however, she did mention, like, fuck the police.
Yeah.
And I was like, no. Why are you doing this? Like, because now you've got a generation of kids who are listening to fuck the police. And I've seen TikTok videos out there too, where police have been swarmed, and because they didn't draw their weapons, obviously they're not going to draw their weapons because there wasn't like an actual life-threatening threat there. However, they were being like water bombed and, water guns, and kids were just swarming them. And I was like, where are the parents? Let me talk to those parents. And yeah, I was a little shit growing up. I get that. I was in all kinds of trouble. However, not once did I ever disrespect the police. I took accountability for what I had done. They had a job to do. And as a matter of fact, they tried to talk me out of that lifestyle. So they did plant seeds in my head. But now we're seeing something very much where they don't have respect for their elders. They have no respect for authority. Even like, just take the testaments of teachers.
Oh God.
Oh my God. They're being swore at. They're being spit on.
They're being beaten. They're being beaten.
Yes.
And and for me, I can see how some people might look at this and say, well, there's oversteps on the part of law enforcement, and there has been. There's no question that that's the case, right? However, you have to look at the totality of the circumstances in the States right now as we speak. I believe, and don't quote me on this, but I believe there's somewhere along the lines of 20 million contacts a year, right? 20 million contacts a year between police and population. A very, very infinitesimal piece of that turns into anything egregious, right? Like a use of force, like a grave use of force, or circumstances where force was either needed or was used inappropriately, right? A very, very tiny margin. And this very tiny margin is now, and even if you look at some of the stats that are being thrown out by some groups such as BLM, or, you're going to see that those stats are not accurate whatsoever. Like, there is not a specific targeting. There is a lack of sensitivity. There is racism. There is a bunch of things we can talk about all day. But to say that, a certain subset of society is killed at a much, much higher rate than everybody else, so far, of all the studies that I've ever looked at, there is nothing that suggests that at all. Nothing.
Interesting.
And so Now, this brings the other piece, which is the behavior in relation to a certain subset of society, which include racism, systemic or otherwise. Those things exist. There's no question that that's the case. It can be the case. But, and so again, it comes to knowledge is power. You can't just embark and engage and jump on every moving bandwagon without thoughts, without research. And I'm not talking about Facebook research. Like, I'm talking about really investing the time into figuring out. So when we look at, you know, the world's landscape right now, and I'm just on the tail end of a master's of international security. I got like a couple of weeks left.
Nice.
But when we look at the world's landscape right now, it is a terrifying prospect with all that's going on in the world. But we have people grabbing flags and waving flags where there is no business waving flags because they don't know what's going on at all.
I agree.
And so I have no problem with people interfering with, like, say, you know, blatant human rights violation, kids being hurt or killed or whatever the case may be. We should all strive and we should all be completely unequivocally against that and make it known.
Yeah.
But don't act like you understand the dynamic of the conflict, because you don't. And people that have studied the region for 30 years that have PhD in that don't.
Exactly.
And so definitely you don't, right?
Yes, agreed.
And so, but again, it's that emotional regulation where it's easier to jump on a bandwagon with all guns blazing. Oh man, people are dying and this is happening, and you know, without thoughts, but it has consequences to do that. Yeah. And we can't help the problem if we become a part of the problem. You know, there was issues. Say, let's take the landscape with Russia and Ukraine, for example. Well, there was there was several historical issues in Ukraine long before Russia got in. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Now, is that taken away from the civilians that are perishing as a result of the conflict? Absolutely not. It doesn't. Like should be our main focus, our main priorities is to always mitigate and stop the loss of life in the civilian context. But let's not act like, you know, Ukraine wasn't corrupted to the core. Exactly. That Ukraine wasn't kept out of NATO on account of its corruption. That the Russian Ukrainian were being discriminated against within Ukraine and killed. Yeah. There was genocidal there was a whole bunch of things happening there within the context of that country, and then Russia comes out and does what Russia does. And then everybody's like, okay, I'm pro-Ukraine. I'm pro-Russia. I'm pro this. I'm pro that. It's like, whoa. This is not how this works. Yeah. It's not how it works. Yeah. There was issues here. There is issues here. This should not, and this should not. There is no real. So if you pick up a flag, what you are effectively saying is, I'm taking a side. A side. Yeah. In a conflict that I know nothing about. Nothing about. You don't. No, I totally agree with that. And, you know, and war has been part of our history since man hit the ground running. You know, it's just because now we have this tool called the internet that we're exposed now to live streaming. And, oh my God, look at the atrocities that are happening. Like, pick a side because they're invoking fear in us, you know, and oh, look at over here. There's another distraction. But you're right. We don't have a clue what's going on over there. And I do have some friends that, you know, their families, their lineages are from there. Yeah. And they're, like you said, they're not even speaking on it. Yeah, because they know how complex it is, and they know that it's not a one-sided affair, right? Yeah. And let's take this, because this is a perfect segue, because we were talking about exposing shortcomings, right? Well, exposing shortcomings as an individual is the way to salvation, while exposing shortcoming as a collective is the way to salvation. And we refuse to do that. Yeah, it's so true. We refuse to do that. For as long as two parties involved in a conflict don't take ownership over their piece, regardless of what the other side has done, and the other side does the same, and they both agree that moving forward, none of this matters, it's never going to happen. Oh, I agree. It just keeps perpetuating, you know, because now there's going to be retaliation, and you know, it's just going to keep going and going and going. And well, now there's additional hurt.
Oh, it's
There's
yeah.
additional hurt. Now you have lost, a family member, a cousin, a friend, a baby, or whatever the case may be. And so
Yeah.
now you're transposing that hate to to the next person, and the next person takes that into account, and they go, that's why when you look at the counterterrorism landscape, when you look at sort of I think it's Eric Schmidt that has a really, really sort of uh, detailed map of the reasons for terrorism mechanisms over the centuries, and he came to a conclusion, and he sort of captures that in the paper, that every generation has its thing, and generally if something is a contributor to terrorism for one generation, it generally will not follow to the next generation. 40 years. So it's about 40-year cycle. You got 40 years of terrorism attack on account of X, Y, and Z. And then in 40 years, you can expect that there will be almost none of those. And there will be a completely different set of circumstances or set of triggering sort of mechanisms. But the caveat to that is religion. Why is that? Because it's passed on generation to generation with so much emotion and intensity and passion that it keeps on going. So religious conflicts, any other reasons why terrorist attack will be committed, generally will subside within the course of one generation.
Okay.
As soon as it's tied into religion, it has the propensity to go on forever. There's a reason for that. It's the emotional engagement piece. Right.
Yes. Yeah. And I see that all the time, right. With the religious indifferences with people, and it's coming over here too, though. That's the scary part, is that now we're starting to see it here. And I've never really been a religious person. I mean, I definitely believe something that is much greater than myself. I probably take a more of a spiritual path, and I actually practice a lot of indigenous spiritual practices. Because they're more at peace with the land, be good to your fellow man and whatnot. And I find that the religions is kind of like what wreaks havoc. I mean, am I out of place by saying that?
Well, so I did a bit of study on this, and war religion has caused 5 billion deaths since the beginning of time. And that is of recorded history, because obviously we know that, 5,000 years ago, I don't know how great the administrative books were to keep track of everything. And we're also not talking about, people going in and completely eradicating parts of history. We know the clergy's done that, several times over, but we also know the Spaniards did that with the Mayans, for example. And we have remnants of but a lot of the deep knowledge in the Mayan culture was eradicated by the Spaniard.
Yes. Yeah.
So if you take into account the fact that we can't tell the story to the next person and make it make sense when it reaches 5 people from now, imagine what happens if there's been tempering of the evidence, if there has been 5,000 years in between, language barriers and all of those things. What do we actually know?
Yeah.
Like, what do we actually know? What do we actually know that gives us enough information to act appropriately?
Yeah, so true. Now, what do you think about kind of like this duality in our existence? You know what I mean? Like, there's why is there war in the first place? Like, why does this even all come about? Because I've actually sat with indigenous shamans, and I've gone into the plant medicine ceremony space and stuff. And I've actually been on these quests where I was witness to the duality. And for whatever reason, I mean, I obviously don't have the secrets of the universe, but it's like, why is it that throughout all this time, we have to kill one another to rule and conquer?
God, if we can answer this question right now, both you and I never have to worry a day in our life. It's so interesting because, they say, if you want to test a man's true character, give him power, not money, not anything else. And so I think that a lot of it comes down to power struggles. A lot of it comes down. But if the base premise of our international relations theories, or the way that we conduct international relationships between countries, is heavily based in military.
Mm-hmm.
heavily based in military capabilities,
Mm-hmm.
and offsetting, somebody's threat of harm
Mm-hmm.
by having our own and all of this stuff. So it's so tied in to the every fabric and the essence of our humanity from
Mm-hmm.
thousands and thousands of years ago,
Thousands and
of
thousands.
wanting to expand taking the tribe and wanting to take the other tribes,
Mm-hmm.
and at the end of the day, I think it just comes down to being human. Greed.
Mm-hmm.
Greed is a thing, and it, if there's rewards, like financial rewards, for instance, which is one of the primary reward system. Let's call a spade here, and it creates a sense of pleasure and security, which goes against the opposite of that is lacking survivability. And so if this helps you process life in a way that you think you're safer and you're going to live longer, it's going to be really hard from a forensic biology standpoint to not engage in those behaviors.
Yes.
Because those behaviors are at the very core of survivability. If I take the other person's land, or if I expand my kingdom and we get prosperous and we do X, Y, and Z, you just given yourself a whole bunch of reasons why that's a valuable course of action. And what I'm going to do, though, is unite everybody when I get there. So we have and whatever stories they tell themselves, but and there's no denying that at times going to war and unifying helped. I think nobody would argue that the Allied getting together to, sort of bring the fight to the Germans wasn't the right course of action. I think everybody pretty much understands that was the right course of action.
Right.
But the intrinsic reasons why humanity seeks more than what they have, that they're willing to take it by force, that some people are predisposed, and we can look at the history of warfare, and I can tell you, having dove quite substantially in the history of warfare, one of the consistent pieces that seem to come back over and over again is ego.
Very good. Yes. Yeah.
Pride, national pride, national ego, individual ego. And when we start talking about autocratic or communistic or what's the other word I'm looking for here? But if in the case of one leader leading basically and everybody else kind of just being at the mercy of every decision they make, right? Then you increase the propensity to take that and to turn an inch into a mile that turns into 100 kilometers.
And this is exactly where I wanted this conversation to go. It's kind of like the history of warfare and the humanity in a whole, because even in the animal kingdom, we're always going to see like that territorial, the fit of the survival of the fittest and whatnot. However, we're supposed to be the moral animal, the animal with morals. And it's like, wow, when did that check out and leave? So it's interesting. And then just sitting with the indigenous shamans too, like we go down these rabbit holes all the time, and, and they believe that we can unite humanity as a whole. But I'm like, well, how do we do that?
Well, it starts with, as humanity, we need a collective belief that we can.
Yes.
That's where it starts. And then we need collective steps to make that happen. Nothing happens by accident in life. If you set a desired outcome, that desired outcome would come to fruition once you put the appropriate steps, one in front of the other, so that you can move incrementally in the direction of the desired outcome. And if we did that as the collective, and if we addressed everything that way, just imagine that the world is one big house, and everything that happens in each of those rooms, there is a board of director that looks at it to make sure that things are, but the complicating factors are religious ideology, language barriers, cultural barriers, and all of those things have to be negotiated with. And that is very difficult. Different level of education, different level of capacity, different level of financial means, different level. And so now we're putting essentially a giant human melting pot and try to say, you guys agree on something. Have you ever tried to go for lunch or for dinner with 4 people? How long does it take to make a decision?
Yeah, it's very frustrating.
What do we do with 7 billion?
Yeah, no, this is so true. Yes. One drop at a time, right? Until the glass raises.
Precisely. And if nothing else, there's a lot of this stuff that's outside the sphere of influence of common folks like you and me.
Yeah.
If we have a certain influence, as we do now, as you do with your platform, as you will when you're a therapist, that is where the change happens.
Yes.
On an individual basis. And a lot of people don't believe that that can be the case. And it is absolutely the case.
It is absolutely the case.
That's how organizations can be turned around as well.
Absolutely. I so love that comment, Seb, because that's exactly how I used to do my job as a safety. I mean, let's face it, nobody wanted to see the safety. You know, so when I did my safety meetings, there was sometimes I felt intimidated or felt like I wasn't really accepted and whatever. I'm not worried about that part. But what I went in there was the attitude of if I can just change one person's thoughts today, just one person. And even on these platforms, you know, I look at the collective and I'm like, why in the F do these guys not have like 1 million followers? Like, I actually kind of get angry. I'm like, this is the stuff that people need to hear.
100%.
And then I have to remind myself, yeah, but Rhonda, if they can change the life of one person today, they've done their job.
I couldn't agree more. I think we're vastly underplaying how much we can change. And I have this conversation a lot with people that have organizational issues, right? And people that will put a lot of emphasis on what management is doing and what management isn't doing and all of those things in a total sort of victim mentality way. And that goes nowhere because it's completely outside your sphere of influence, which means you have zero influence over, and now you're going to spend your bandwidth focusing on something you can't change anything about. But amidst all that, you've never optimized you.
Yeah.
So now there's still issues around you that are occurring as a result of you not being the person you should be. So now you need to refocus and bring that focus back to your own sphere of influence. Make yourself the leader that you need to be. And you're going to proliferate that goodness through the ranks. And one day, the person that's going to take the helm of the organization will be somebody that was beneficially impacted by somebody like you.
Yes.
But as long as we think that that's futile, that it's going to take too long, and that we're not, guess what? The time is occurring anyways. You guys have been bitching about your organization for 20 years. In another 20 years, you'll still be bitching, but
it's the worst. You know, and that's the thing is that person will go home to their spouse and complain about their organization. And then they'll go to the organization and complain about their spouse. And people that generally complain about stuff like that are just they're not brave enough to actually face it and get shit done to make a change.
Yes, absolutely. And then with that, imagine what happens when negative inject are consistently put in the person that, say, you confide into. You don't realize you're affecting that person. You don't realize that person is affecting another person because that person just so happened to manage her in an office. And she was hoping to have a nice conversation last night about whatever. And she ended up hearing about your organizational problems. So now she's tired and now she's going to work, or he is going to work, impacting the life of others. And those guys are going to have a shit day because that person, you know, simply didn't have the chance to kind of settle down and relax and refresh and recharge your batteries. So now you're going on and on and on. What does that mean? How many people are impacted by your inability to see that you're not helping at all and you're just venting away? But you've just impacted 100 lives. So
true. So true. Yeah, that's really well said. And I see that all the time. You know, people come to therapy and that's all they want to do is complain, and they want me to be a sounding board. And I'm like, nope, we're going to stop right there. What is your part in this?
100%.
And then as soon as I put that onto them, they get offended. And I've had clients not call me again. And it's like, well, good luck with the next therapist.
They're simply not ready for therapy. And there's a good quote that I really like to use, and it says something like this. And I can't remember exactly who said it, but it's still very, very good. And it says something like, if you want to do something for yourself, tell them what they want to hear. If you want to do something for them, tell them what they need to hear.
Ooh, yes. Heck yeah. Yeah. But a lot of people can't take constructive feedback.
100%. But
hard.
that is at the center of everything that'll ever be a problem for them.
Yes.
There is nowhere else to look at.
Yeah.
And some people will go to grave like this.
Mm-hmm.
Some people will be on their deathbed and still not realizing that they were in control this entire time. But because of their refusal to look where they should have, and because of their refusal to listen to input or to introspect or to change, you know, and I hear this all the time. It's like, well, they're too old to change. Oh my God.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Stop.
That blows my mind. Yeah. You know, that is such a lie that people tell themselves. But then we're programmed in ways like when we hear like old adages like, oh, you can't teach a dog new tricks. You know, it's like, no, actually, that's a lie.
It is a lie.
Yeah. And there's a really simple formula that, you know, the Jack Canfield methodology, they follow. It's E plus R equals O. The event plus your response equals the outcome. And it's just that simple. It's that simple. E plus R equals O.
I absolutely love that. I absolutely love that. And it puts you in the driver's seat.
Mm-hmm.
And it allows you a certain level of comfort knowing that when adversity hits,
mm-hmm.
you are controlling 100% of the response to it,
mm-hmm.
which gives you a sense of control. We already know you can't control all the adversity that's going to come in your life.
That's right.
But
mm-hmm.
you can 100% control your reaction to it.
Absolutely. Yes. I agree. That's so true. You know, and that's another thing too. Like when you've had a life of like military and police force, and I've had a life of like organized crime and whatnot. Sometimes when we go out into the world, the integration into like just normal society, I guess, I don't know how to really peg that, but
traditional society. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's
mm-hmm.
just really, it's really hard sometimes for me to have like even a normal conversation with people because they're living in this like what I would call the matrix or behind the white picket fence. And it's like, oh, you know, la, 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 rainbows and butterflies. And it's like, actually, no, the world doesn't operate like that,
mm-hmm.
you know, and sometimes it's really hard to kind of get that through people's heads, you know, that there is certain things like adversities that, yes, rather than playing the victim, bad things happen. I get it. Bad things happen to good people all the time. And yes, that sucks. I'm sorry for that. However, you know, being stuck in that victim mentality is a choice.
100%. And also making peace with the prospect that
mm-hmm.
that's life. And you have an alternative. If you want life to never get better,
mm-hmm.
then don't live it. Right.
Yeah.
But for as long as you're there making the right decisions, mm-hmm. and for as long as you're there responding appropriately to what you are facing, you can always make things better.
Yes.
You have a control to do that.
Yeah.
But it's going, you know, and sometimes it takes a beating, you know, sometimes
mm-hmm.
you're taking a beating. There's just times in life where it really doesn't matter. You're just going to get beat on and beat on and beat on. And
mm-hmm.
you just inch forward with a desired outcome in mind, which is, what can I learn out of this? What kind of meaning do I attach to this? As opposed to
meaning.
To I want to be happy, you know, and I always tell my clients that stop seeking happiness and seek meaning. You can find that everywhere.
I love that. And that's actually kind of the theme behind my platform, Trouble to Transformation, is allowing people to tell their stories for a much needed and deeper meaning. Like, why keep all of that? Like, why would my experiences, what good is it for me to keep it all to myself right now and be like, oh yeah, that happened to me and oh, I'm better now? No, I need to take that story, go out into the world and say, hey, there's a meaning behind all of this. And this is what I learned. And now let me help you.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah, I strongly believe, I mean, humans are tribal. Right. We are tribal, whether we care to admit it or not, from a forensic biology standpoint, yes. We are absolutely. And that's the sort of the essence of our primary survival mechanism. Mm-hmm. And as a result of that, we need to be looking out for each other. And if you've never had to need other humans, you are one of the luckiest humans I've ever seen. And, you know, or not, because
I would call that a bit of a disorder, though, a personality disorder.
Of course it is. Of course it is.
Yeah.
But, you know, we have to put on the table that we all understand that sometimes things get so overwhelming that we all want to move in a cabin in the wood and never speak to anybody
there.
again.
I was there. I was there. Yes.
So that's kind of what I'm referring to, right? But
yes.
but also we have to be aware of the fact that, cancer is going to come through, that these people are going to rally, that this is going to happen, that this has the potential to be a person that could impact your kid, for example, or this, and so it's easy to want to self-isolate on account of protectionism mechanism.
You said it.
Yeah,
yes.
But it's definitely not healthy. And so there are healthy mechanisms you can apply to make yourself a bit safer emotionally, mentally, and physically, but at the same time, not go in the realm of the other. Yeah, and it goes back to what we were talking earlier about the the one-sided risk assessment, where you're not taking into considerations the things that you're not going to experience as a result of your
absolutely. Well, we've been 2 hours, but I do have to ask you one more question. So I do realize, your life experiences have been, very unique. And I do understand how difficult and how much work it would take to kind of shut off some of those parts of your life in order to integrate into the norms of society. Is that where poetic savagery came in?
So the poetic savagery project was an attempt by me to make an impactful difference in the life of first responders. Okay. So the goal of it was to show them that in order to be effective and have longevity and wellness in the accomplishment of first response or a life of service, that you needed to be well-rounded, that you need to have a 360-degree approach. And this is not just, we're talking multi-layered, right? So it's not just 360 degrees, it's actually multi-layered as well. And so the goal of that was to show all of the healthy mechanisms that first responders can engage in to help themselves remain healthy. Instead of being reactive, I spent 10 years as a cop, so therefore I'm traumatized. I spent 20 years as a cop and I'm not. Okay, so I'm not suggesting that if somebody they're a lesser human or whatever, but there are mechanisms that you can employ to make yourself more resilient. Is that simple? And so we know that adversity increases resilience. Adversity is not always given to everybody, because it's a matter of luck, really, or bad luck, whatever you want to call it. But we do know that there are certain self-imposed regimens that can really create a controlled amount of adversity that will help you build resilience. Right?
Yeah.
And so what I wanted with the Poetic Savagery projects is to say, stop looking at yourself as a first responder, as a unidimensional being.
Yeah.
And start tapping into all those other things. It's almost like without pretension, it's almost like a higher level of consciousness for first responders.
And that's exactly the message that I got from those videos, because I've watched a few of them, and they're beautiful. They're amazing. And that's exactly kind of what I was thinking, that might be the message there, is like that duality.
That's exactly what it is.
Go out into the world as a first responder, military, police, but yet have this like beauty in nature and expanded consciousness, and and even like breath work. Everybody should have a breath work practitioner on the payroll.
Absolutely. There is zero
game
question.
Changing.
I mean, I just came back from a veterans retreat in Mexico, in Tulum, Mexico, and we were running temescals and
I saw that,
which is a Mayan tradition, sweat lodge kind of thing, and there is incredible amount of lost wisdom within those practices.
So true.
And it's so interesting how humans are so viscerally objected to some of those things. And I think ultimately it comes down to, if I give you all the answers to your problems, you no longer have any problems to bring to bear, right? So people love to bring problems with your solutions, right?
Yeah.
And because then it favors the status quo.
Yeah.
And so having an open mind is the first part. If you've been doing the same thing all over again, and you're experiencing the same results, you're now exemplifying insanity, right? Trying the same thing all over
the
again,
definition of insanity.
Outcome. Yeah. Precisely.
Yep.
And so that means, and that should trigger you into thinking, there ought to be more to this, and there ought to be other angles that I can come at this problem by. And having an open mind and understanding some of those things that may look strange because you don't know them. But if you start discussing, like when we did the Temescal, I was having a bit of a conversation with one of the maestro that was running it, and the amount of wisdom that he injected in my life in a 30-second segment of broken English was incredible. So imagine if I had a lifetime of looking into, you know, the things that he anchors his life on.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah. Well, and that was my question about the meaning of war. You know what I mean? And I know that's very complex, and we'll never really know the mysteries of the universe, maybe after death, probably. But you're absolutely right. Like, my biggest aha moments, the expanded consciousness, was sitting with a shaman, right? To teach me about what it is to actually be a human, regardless of the adversities that are happening. You know, so it was a special moment. I will cherish it for the rest of my life, those moments with that shaman.
It is incredible. And, you know, if you look at breath work, as you were just mentioning, or just alluded to, breath work, for example, can teach a person how much inner power you have to tap into the things that are subconsciously affecting you.
Yeah.
I can go upstairs right now, and as long as I have a healthy environment, and as long as my mindset and my intent is righteous and healthy, I can go up and do breath work in my room for the next 15-20 minutes, and I can essentially tap into the things that are subconsciously affecting me to a level where they can now be addressed.
Absolutely. That's like how we get to know ourselves.
That is an incredible amount of power, and there's necessarily no psychedelics involved, and not that there's anything wrong with going down that route, but that is without the help of external help, so to speak.
Yeah. And well, I mean, with the psychedelics, so like I have sat with ayahuasca, and it was, you know, game changing. However, intense, so intense. It was hard work. It's not recreational by any means.
It's not for the faint of heart.
Oh God, no. However, I do realize though that I wouldn't rely on that experience in order to get me to that expanded consciousness, because breath work can do that for me as well. Right. And people would do so much better in life with their thoughts and their anxieties and whatever else that they're struggling with if they actually had a spiritual practice that included breath work.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest problem that we have as a species is that our brain, in order to make sense of the overwhelming amount of information, and so imagine if you were in a tribe in the Mayans, for example, like you were a Mayan and you're in a tribe, what your exposure is everything that's contained within the tribe. That includes history. Yeah. It includes all of the things that you need to know about anything. It's all contained in there. Yeah. So you can make sense of life in your circumstances, but right now we're bombarded by 8 gazillion things, right? So now you're trying to make sense of life, but all of those things are adding to the complexity of life, and our brains are unable to process that. It's too complex for us to make sense and establish a roadmap. Yeah. And that is the propensity that people have to avoid the things that expand their brain or expand their knowledge, because it just adds to the already overwhelming amount of information that they are receiving. Yeah. That is what will limit a lot of people.
Yeah, that is so true. Very well said. You're very articulate.
Thank you.
You know, it's funny because I consult with a military guy. He's 20-year combat soldier, and now he's a therapist, and I do consult with him every once in a while. And he said if I ever had like an ex-military, ex-law enforcement in my chair as like for therapy, that you never, ever, ever want to try to outsmart them cognitively, because they will win every time.
I have a joke for this. I always tell people, if you want me to gain anything from therapy, you better have a PhD of psychology.
It's so true. Yeah. You would actually be a really good therapist. Have you ever thought about getting into the therapy role?
Yeah, so so my mom was a psychologist at you know, when because there's several decades, but the last 2 decades, anyways. She passed away in 2009, but that was something I was very much exposed to my entire life, or at least after the age of 10, And recently, so I'm wrapping up my master's now, and I was looking for a PhD to engage in. And so international security wasn't really sort of interesting to me. Not because there isn't good work to be, but I didn't do my master's for professional reasons. I did it for developmental reasons.
Okay.
And so now I'm like, you know what? So I reached into a university last week and try to find out if I somehow could do another master's in psychology. And the intake person, after an hour conversation with me, she's like, you should go the PhD route of psychology because you can. And so now I've been toying with the idea of potentially doing that as my PhD by research, following this master's. So we'll see.
Yeah, good for you, Seb. That's amazing. Because you've definitely got that therapist vibe for sure. Yeah, and therapists need therapists. So I'd be in your chair. I would be in the chair.
Yeah,
no, it's true though. It's true, and that's why I consult with that individual. Because I was a high school dropout. I'm not that articulate. I mean, I'm getting better. I read a lot and I try to speak as much as I can. However, it is a little bit intimidating sometimes sitting across from somebody that is extremely articulate, because you've definitely used some big words in this conversation. I'm like, damn.
Yeah, but that's not always very telling of what's going on in there,
Oh, yeah. But you know what, though?
Don't let that fool you.
Well, maybe, but I don't believe you're fooling me one bit. I believe you're as authentic as it comes. So
for sure.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Seb. I really, really appreciate that you spent 2 hours with me. It was a lot of fun. I'm like, damn, I want to talk to that guy. He's going to be so interesting.
Well, I hope I didn't disappoint.
Oh my God. Heck no. Yeah. And, feel free, keep in touch. We're on social media. I will include the collective link into this podcast. And did you want me to include your own personal account?
Yeah, my Instagram would be great.
Okay.
I mean, I have business accounts and all this stuff, but I'm not worried about that because they're really not tended to very much. So I find that most of my contacts are coming from my personal Instagram.
So Does your girlfriend do the photography as well?
No, she doesn't do photography, but she is a absolutely insane makeup artist at all levels. So whether it be, wedding makeups or movie makeups with full out zombie outfits and,
wow.
She just has the whole gambit and she is top tier. She's already she had 5 magazine covers by the time she graduated school.
That's amazing. I would, if she does like individual stuff, like there's always a time I love to do like a photo shoot just to upgrade my accounts and whatnot. And I've always wanted to do a makeup artist in that sense. So
unbridled elegance.
Oh, sorry.
Unbridled elegance.
Okay, I will definitely look her up for sure. I love it because even your photography is it's so good. Like
Blue Line Syndicates.
Oh, damn, you've got like a whole team.
Good yeah, there's none of this is my doing. I couldn't take a picture if my life depended on it.
Yeah.
But I got
and
pros
also one more thing too, Seb. I am in order to do the coming soon for this podcast, I've put together like a little 15 to 20 second like intro. I'm just going to send them to your email. Just pick one because I picked 2. I made 2.
Sure.
And I hacked a couple pictures off your Instagram to put them in.
That's what they're there for.
Yeah, of course. Well, I always like to ask permission though, right? Because it is considered hacking when I've done a screenshot. So yeah, awesome. Okay, Seb. And I actually might get a hold of you in the future for some consulting.
Perfect.
I would really like that because I do need some help designing some workshops to go into the penitentiaries.
Yep.
And I think that you would be a guy that I could probably do like 3 to 6 sessions with just to kind of get some like framework.
Absolutely. I'm in.
Okay. I love it. Thanks, Seb.
Okay, madam.
Okay. Take care.
day.
Yes. Enjoy your afternoon. Okay. Bye-bye.